Hello, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Well, you are very well-rounded. You're a speaker, and it looks like you help people rewrite their stories, which to me is like so needed in the world, right? We're all slaves to the mind. And you have a top-rated podcast called Mind Love. And you're here today to talk about some cool stuff, which I'm really excited to dive into. Ancient myths that are the same, right? All around the world. And I always go, why is that the case, right? Yes. So I can't wait to talk about that. But before we do that, Melissa, I always love to have everybody share their own personal story. Like, what's your story and how did you rewrite it? Because I'm guessing you did.
Ooh, well, my story is like, it's like a bad Lifetime movie when I really look at it. I ended up at age 22 with a felony conviction for someone else's crime.
Whoa.
The crazy part is, looking back, I can see, and it took me a while to see, this was not immediate, but just how every choice that led me there makes perfect sense. And it started when I was 15. I was sexually assaulted at my first high school party. And I was completely unconscious, and there was actually a crowd of older boys around my abuser cheering him on. And when I got to school, of course, it spread around school since there were multiple people there, and I didn't know how to deal with it. So I just didn't. I think that was one of the first times too, where I really just felt what it feels like for my reputation not to match who I felt like I was inside. And so I started losing pieces of myself without even realizing it. I didn't even really know I was sexually assaulted. I didn't have the language for what happened to me. I didn't have the vulnerability to open up with people about it. And so I thought I had been drinking, so this was my fault. This was just my first sexual experience. And I think losing yourself isn't this dramatic moment where everything falls apart at once. It's slower than that. Like every year, every small hit to my worth, every time I pushed down what I was really feeling, it was almost like that concept of putting a frog in water and slowly turning up the heat. That's how it was going. I just had no idea how much of myself was disappearing. And the less I valued myself, the more I craved validation from other people. And the worse I treated myself, the worse I let other people treat me. And so when my dad died a couple of years later, it was almost like whatever fragile sense of self I had died with him. Yeah. And I did what a lot of us do when the pain gets too big. I just tried to numb it all out with bulimia or pills or whatever promised to make me feel something different. And so it was this cycle of self-destruction, but my normal just kept shifting. And I think when you can't find anything within yourself to hold on to, you start just reaching for anything outside of yourself to fill the void. Yeah. And so I was pretty empty. I just didn't know it. I just knew the ache. And that's when I met who we will call Mike, although I don't know why I protect his identity. You could figure it out pretty easily. He swept me off my feet from the time I met him with 5-star dinners, luxury resorts all the time. He actually even gave me this diamond necklace on our very first date that made me feel valuable, really. And then the lies started early. We were staying in hotels because his house was being renovated. And then it turned out he lived with his mom. And then he said, I was living there to take care of my disabled brother. I just don't like sharing about it. And then turns out his brother didn't actually live there. And also his disability was like a mild case of ADHD. And so every lie got a little bit bigger. And somehow the excuses got easier to swallow. I often joke that he was like training me to deep throat his bullshit. But part of me knew that something was off. I could feel the cracks in the reality that he was selling me. But admitting it meant admitting that the dream was dead in a way. Like there was no knight in shining armor coming to sweep me out of my life and into theirs. Yeah. which meant facing everything that I was trying to escape. There was no easy way out. And so when I found out he was cheating repeatedly, I buried that too because the apologies always felt so good. And then I discovered his meth addiction, and I was actually relieved because it was something outside of myself to blame for everything that was going wrong. Like, he wasn't cheating on me because this person was better. He was just messed up in the head. And so I wasn't just ignoring red flags. I was almost like collecting them, like they were going to complete some kind of a set. But really deep down, I believed he was all I deserved. And if he barely wanted me, why would somebody else? That thought was scary. And so a lot went on in this year that we were together, but I did finally try to get away from him, or just I knew I needed a break. I went to Hawaii where a friend of mine was living, stayed for a month, kind of got myself together, was feeling a lot more hopeful. But when I got back, I hadn't really done any of the internal work. And so it was just a couple of phone calls till I was sucked right back in to where I was before I left. And soon after, we were driving to lunch and I saw police lights behind us. And I thought a speeding ticket or broken taillight or something. But then they pulled us over and backup cars came and they made us get out of the vehicle so they could search it. And I just remember standing there and it was such a weird feeling. Like, it was a combination of having no idea what was going on and also finally, some deep part of me knew what was happening and I just never looked at it. So it was just like split personality moment. And when the police officer opened the trunk, I'll just never forget the look on his face when he saw over 50 lock boxes, bolt cutters, and cases of stolen jewelry. And so I knew he had a jewelry business. He had a jewelry business with his dad. So he told me, and we were selling a lot of this jewelry, and it was a lot of jewelry that were all in the same like category, like this gaudy jewelry that would have fit for the Palm Desert area that we were in. And we were selling it on eBay. I had no idea somebody would be dumb enough to sell stolen jewelry on eBay. But it turns out his jewelry business was actually stealing it from houses that were for sale and selling everything on eBay. Wow. And what he actually did with his dad was loans. And so he had all the MLS reports when people were home, when they weren't, if they didn't. So he'd find places where people still lived, but they worked 9 to 5. And he'd go in and he would just clip the lockbox, jimmy it out in his Mercedes Benz, walk in with a key, come out with all the jewelry. Wow. And he reported him suspicious because he didn't look suspicious. But then it started getting sloppy because of his meth addiction, and he would invite his meth dealer to take the TVs. And so it was unraveling. But anyways, So
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So did you you knew what he was selling jewelry, but you had no idea that he was breaking into people's homes and that kind of thing. Yeah. So when you open the trunk and see this, what is your first instinct?
I saw all the jewelry. I saw what I was willing to see. And so I was trying to figure it out. I was figuring out a puzzle, and I'm the lock boxes. I didn't know until there was a few months afterwards where he ended up getting rehab time, and he started to be honest. I think I saw a lot of versions of him, and none of them were actually honest. It was always manipulative in one way or another. But he did tell me a lot of how it went down, or what he did. And so I learned a lot of things. And part of why the jewelry all looked the same was one of the people that he robbed was actually some 90-year-old man that would work at the Palm Desert Street Fair, and he would bring jewelry. And I guess Mike was sitting there this dude has $1 million worth of jewelry, and he's coming Saturday and Sunday. No way he's loading it back up in his house. It's probably in the garage. And so he taught himself to pick the lock on the side of the garage, took a little bit at first, then he took more, and the guy kept showing up, and then he took almost all of it, and the guy never showed up again. And you got to imagine stealing this livelihood. Who knows how much that man worked for that?
Oh, but I know. And he has not a care in the world. Could care less. Yeah. And
because our cases were combined, that necklace I was wearing was stolen too. I was helping him sell this jewelry. We were we were faced with a choice, really. If I took it to court to prove my innocence, which I could have, because there were multiple eyewitness reports. 2 of them involved a blonde girl while I was in Hawaii. He was cheating on me with a sex worker, and he happened to have my dog during that time. He picked up my dog from my mom. So people saw this little dog and a blonde girl. But like I said, I was not even on the mainland. Could have guaranteed my innocence. But if I did that, he would have had to go to court too, and he wouldn't have been able to take a deal. And so he would have been guaranteed 10 years plus in prison. And at that point, giving him everything was almost a reflex. So I took the felony. And I just remember sitting in that courtroom later, listening to his victims, like the military mom whose jewelry box actually held her dead son's baby hair that she had on her nightstand. This elderly couple missing a lifetime of anniversary gifts. And he's just sitting there with no remorse. And I'm bawling my eyes out as I'm basically sacrificing my freedom for his.
Right.
And something clicked. Not all the way. There was just like something that disjointed in the way that I was living my life. And it took me years to really see things as they were. But I eventually realized that every single day I had been creating this reality without knowing it. That I think, especially in the self-development world, we have this misconception like, oh my gosh, I'm learning I can create my reality. Like I have the power to manifest. And they think it's something that they can like sit down and do in a targeted way. Like, oh, I'll manifest on Mondays and the rest of the time I'll just wing it. But the truth is there's only 2 options. You are either consciously creating your life or you are unconsciously repeating. And there's no middle ground. And you might not know what that unconscious is, but like I said, like for me, it was this seed and a slow burn of just chipping away at my inner stability. To I was reaching for anything, for somebody to tell me who I was in a way, to find that peace and joy through my external circumstances. But I was very unhealed.
Wow. Like that must have been so, did you feel manipulated by him? I mean, I mean,
and like, if I, it's easy to tell it in that nugget of a story, but like, but I went to jail. He went to jail. I was ashamed to call my parents. My mom worked at a church at the time. My stepdad literally volunteered at the police station that I was arrested at in the homicide investigations. And so I didn't call them. I waited to get out of my own recognizance. I tried to call Mike. I got out and they just sort of let me out after several days of being in there because it was over a weekend, and just sort of spit me out in downtown Indio. And I like took a bus to Walmart. My first thought that I needed was like the things that I bought at Walmart right after I was released was makeup, a mini hair straightener, and a burner phone. Like what? like I'm worried about how I'm going to look right now. Like just looking at the brokenness. When I was in jail, I was worried about getting a razor from like the commons and trying to figure out how to shave my legs. And my biggest concern was actually not even that my life was imploding, but that I couldn't find enough privacy to purge my food because I was severely bulimic at that time and sharing a cell with 20 other women. So just like the level of lost was very sad, but I did not. I wish I was just like, wow, you're a horrible person and stop talking to him then. But our court date was pushed back for years, 2 full years. I went and visited him in rehab when I found out where he was. Days later, I was like worried about being rejected still. That's when he ended up telling me a lot of things. There was one time I went out there. I had quite a bit of savings before I moved there. And so I just like wasted it all during this period of time. But like one time I had to go back for my court date while he was still in rehab. He got out for 2 days. We stayed at a hotel and I went back home on a bus because he also destroyed my car.
Oh my God.
And when I came back, realized there was a charge for car parking for like $35 and found out he brought his favorite sex worker to the hotel and spent room service with my money. Like the amount of things. So yes, I felt manipulated by him very much so. And he's sitting there like and so he's sharing with me how much he's changed. And like, this is the person I had been waiting for during this. Well, he's just doing the same stuff. And so, he did end up I moved to Los Angeles to get away from him. And I just knew I needed to restart my life. I had no idea how, but that's where I was being pulled to. He ended up moving down the street from me into a sober living facility, and he was never sober. Threw a brick through my windshield, broke into my house while I was sleeping. Like I had to move to get away from him again. And then he was finally arrested for another string of robberies, and he got sentenced to 11 years in prison, and I was finally free. And so it was then really that I was like, okay, I'm not going to waste this freedom. I need to figure out what this was all for, because it was really the only way I could look at my life, trusting that there had to be some sort of meaning there. Because otherwise, the only other option was like pressing the reset button. I felt like I wasted everything I had worked for. I'd been an honors student, dean's list, college, like everything felt like it was back to square one, like for nothing. How was I going to explain this on 2 lines of a job application? And so now I was asking different questions really because I had to. Otherwise, I think I would have harmed myself in some big way.
Yeah. Wow. So you go really deep down, right? Until you realize, so what clicked in you? Where were you pulled next? Like, so you're at this pivotal moment, he's locked up, right? Which is really your ticket, right?
Yeah.
So did you see it that way?
Climb out. Like I had gotten really good at disassociating from the time I was 15. And so you'd want to think that I was just like broken during this period of time, but I just kind of kept moving, and not always in healthy ways. Yeah. But eventually I had already gotten into yoga before I met him, and I got really into yoga when I went to Los Angeles, and there was something about the connection with my body that started to heal my relationship with food. And I started to meet different types of people. And so I just get these little seeds of inspiration that I would ignore for too long, and then I would lean into it, and then it started to feel better. And it was this combination of good decisions and really bad decisions. So I spent a good 7 years in LA going deep into spirituality, reading new books, really following that side. And then 9 p.m. would hit, and I'm getting ready to do copious amounts of MDMA at a party in the Hollywood Hills. So it lasted for a very long time. But I think eventually, one by one, the sort of damaging parts of my lifestyle started to fall away. And because I was living this kind of split world, I started to really feel the difference between the two. I remember even doing yoga teacher training. And at the time I was also hanging out with somebody who ended up being my boss for a while. Mind you, I got really good jobs. Like part of what worked for me was, how do I find my level of success without anyone else's permission? And that is what brought me toward entrepreneurship. And I could actually see that at the time, where it was a few years in, where I was like, you know what? So many people go into this with 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And when it's hard, they go back to what's comfortable. And I don't have that back to what's comfortable, because I don't want to deal with the job application process with my current record. And so I had to just go all in. And I went hard, and I got really good at things quickly. I won a contest that got me into a conference. I won a contest at the conference that set up my freelance career. Oh, wow. I was working in the tech industry. I ended up meeting some guy at a club, and I was looking through the app store because I was a nerd. And he's like, did somebody tell you what I do? And he gave me a job in the app world. And I worked my way from social media girl to product designer to vice president within a year and a half. So I've always been a hard worker, and I trusted myself in that, which helped me to not lose complete hope in myself. But I really had to get comfortable feeling my feelings, which took a really long time. And it was so embedded in with, like I said, the sexual assault and the eating disorder. You're really training yourself not to feel the hunger, not to feel the pain, not to feel your own signals. And so, there's things even now where I can feel, that was a scale that I just shed from my past life. I didn't know that was still there,
Oh, yeah.
So,
well, it seems like we're always doing that, aren't we? It's like constantly shedding the skin. Yeah. Well, that's really an amazing story. So how did you like dive into helping people with their own stories? And then tell me how you bridge that into learning about all the myths of the world. So tell us how you get there.
Okay, so there's almost two overlaying stories, but so I did end up working in the startup world for a couple of years, and like I said, my career went well there, and also I had a very interesting relationship with my boss. I was one of the only single women, and he was a big party guy. He was like new money, like let's like buy girls. I was like his wingman all the time. But so we'd be partying all the time, and it was so fun because he just had all this money to do whatever. And I thought it was fun. Let me clarify that. And then I was doing yoga teacher training, and my friends there were like a little younger, but it's just no money. Like everyone's scraping by, like most people in their early 20s.
Yeah.
And I realized how much better it felt there versus my two guy friends that were loaded and kind of using me for wingman. I started to feel how I was completely replaceable there. Like they didn't actually care about me, you know, and if a hot enough girl came, I was ousted. You know, and then these people were like real friends despite the opportunity. And I could feel that. And I was like, you know what, this feels better. And so it was all these really starting to be honest with myself about what felt good versus what looked good. And one of those things was my boss. We'd have a blast sometimes, and then he was just very toxic. Like, and most of the people at the company, I mean, everybody knew it. He would just sit there and scream at you. And because I was closest to him, I was his punching bag quite a bit. And so I thought to myself, like, what do I do to feel purposeful? Because this isn't feeling that. It's a great opportunity, but it's missing a lot of things. And so I knew I needed to find something on the side that lit me up. And I started to become obsessed with the idea of finding my purpose. And then I'd get really discouraged that it didn't show up on my door. And so I finally asked myself, well, maybe I should do all these exercises at the back of the chapters of like the Find Your Purpose books instead of just thinking that more consumption was going to change me somehow.
Right.
Yeah. It might change the way I think a little bit, but if I'm not meeting it with action, it's not going to change any of my behaviors. It's not going to shift at the cellular level. And so I started to ask myself really targeted questions. It was really the first time I immersed myself in self-inquiry. And I asked, like, when am I the happiest? What do I love about my job? What do I dislike about it? How about every other job I've had? What was great? What didn't I like? What do people compliment me on? What do I feel uniquely suited for? What are my natural talents? What am I curious about? What would I do endlessly if I didn't get paid for it? What am I doing anyways? What does my Audible library say about me? And I started to just get really curious and find the patterns. And the great thing is this would be so much easier today because you can get all these answers and then like throw it into AI and probably get insights you've never seen before. But I was doing it all manually. And I did start to see one of the exercises I did was I asked 11 people in my life that knew me in different areas, whether it was a former roommate, a coworker, my mom, like a guy I dated once. And I just said like, hey, and mind you, this was the second stab at this exercise. The first time I chickened out, then I got to my like, all right, I need to do something. And I sent out an email to them and I was like, listen, I'm taking an entrepreneurship course and they're making me do something embarrassing, but I would like to ask you, what do you see in me? Like, what, if I had a superpower, what is that? What might not I see in myself? And the responses were life-changing. One of the things that came out was that I'm good at taking tons of ideas from different fields and figuring out how they relate to one another, or how I'm good at explaining complex ideas in a really simple way. One of my old roommates reminded me of this time that we were sitting around like having a wine night, and I was explaining something in tech, and literally like 4 people had a different way of learning, and I explained it differently for each one. And she said in that moment, she was so impressed by me, and I had no idea that was even a moment. That was just me thing. And the fact that she remembered it from years before, I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I do have a talent with this, and I have been doing this. And so I started to see myself differently. So, but what everything came back to was something about the power of the mind. From the time that I had attached to that concept, when I first heard it as like a 10-year-old, I was like, mind over matter, mind over matter. I still to this day think I might have mind over mattered my asthma, but
That's a good thing.
And that's what all of my Audible library was about, whether it was in spirituality or neuroscience or telekinesis, like everything was around this power of being able to change. And looking back, even in my ancestral history, I can see why that's a thread that would be important to me, because I came from a lot of trauma. But, and so I decided to start a podcast because, again, more questions. I could talk myself out of being on video. I was getting in my head too much when I would write, but I could always talk. And so I decided I was going to start a podcast. The next day, one of my favorite entrepreneurs that I followed at the time, Pat Flynn, sent out an email that he was starting his first podcasting course. And I was like, meant to be. Okay, I'm following this sign. He had the digital version, the in-person version for like $3,000. That was like a 2-day little workshop. And I was like, well, I think I'm going to spring for this, even though I don't have the money. Opened a new credit card, maxed it out immediately, and went to San Diego for his in-person workshop. But I knew how entrepreneurs work. It was his first time launching this program. Whoever did the best was going to be his star students, and my success would be his success, and I'd probably be amplified in some way. That's exactly how it happened. I made sure that I outperformed everybody else. He invited me on his podcast. He invited me on at his next keynote at Podcast Movement to share my story. And within 6 months of launching the podcast, I was speaking on stages on podcast growth. I was featured in almost every podcast app. And so it really took off in a new way. And I believe that's because that was the first time in my life that I really followed my inner signals instead of all of the external ones.
Well, that's awesome. Well, it sounds like you have a very incredible drive, is also by just hearing that. I mean, you're like, I'm doing it. And not only am I going to do it, I'm going to be at the top of doing it, right?
Yeah, I've always been a little weirdly competitive. Like last year, I hadn't been running at all. And I was like, I'm going to sign up for the turkey trot. I won. I came in 9th overall out of 900 people, first of all women. Like, I just get very competitive. However, you asked about how did it bring together story?
Yes.
Well, I really started to figure out how my life had changed. I realized that everything was, I wasn't ever really reacting to my circumstances. It was always the stories about them. It's not that it's not the situations that were suffering. It was my thoughts, my beliefs, my projections into the future, what it made it mean about me. And I started to see that, and I realized rewriting so many parts of my story was important. But I also had this really sort of unique conversion of ideas. Part of what had happened, I was raised very Christian. During my trauma, the sexual assault, losing my dad, losing another friend, I went through a period of like, there is no God. I went to college, took a world religions class. It flipped things on my head of what I thought I knew. I started to see that the stories had existed before the Bible, many of them.
Yeah.
And so I just lost my faith. And during this period, it also felt really empty and meaningless. And so something about no divinity just didn't feel right to me. And so I started to follow this other spiritual path. But I would always say this little secret prayer to Jesus just in case, like, I'm not trying to end up in hell. If I'm going the wrong route, like, guide me back. That's your job. I'm not trying to be defiant. I'm just trying to find what feels right, and this doesn't feel right. So just in case,
covering my bases here.
I was like, this is like having one foot on the gas, one foot on the brakes. Like, it doesn't feel now. Neither of the paths feel right, and so again, self-inquiry, like, what do I need to know to find wholeness and to feel confident on the path that I'm on? And so I decided to start looking into theology, deeply. And one time I was reading something, and I remember saying to a friend of mine, I feel like we misunderstood Jesus's role. And I was like discerning different things. And then I went to a coffee shop, and it was like that same day or the next day, something like that. And I overheard some guy say to somebody out of the blue, which this is the only time I've ever even heard someone mention Jesus' name at a coffee shop, unless it's one of those church coffee shops. And,
right.
and I'm like, And he goes, I just realized we've misunderstood Jesus's role. And I was like, my exact words, I need to eavesdrop immediately. We were talking about Bart D. Ehrman. And so I immediately write down the name, find out he's got dozens of books. I've read nearly all of them now. But then I started following the threads, and I started to understand how, well, first of all, Jesus spoke against the institutions, and then we just institutionalized him.
Oh yeah.
Rewrote so much of the Bible. And I got really clear on like, when was hell first conceptualized? When was it first talked about? Oh, 300 years after Jesus died. Interesting. Like, when did these stories actually originate? What was it trying to tell us? So I had gone so deep in this, always felt like this side little hobby. Yeah. But then I had also been starting my own business. So I understood a lot about marketing from that in the startup world. And then I was interviewing people on my podcast, a lot of neuroscientists. And so I started to see 3 unique angles of story that most people miss. First, there's the neuroscience side. Dan McAdams at Northwestern University actually spent decades researching something called narrative identity. And it's how the stories you tell about your life literally become your psychological reality. And so his research shows that people who construct coherent and meaningful life narratives just have a lot higher levels of mental health and well-being and resilience. And so what is a coherent life narrative? If you are sitting there saying, okay, I'm going to be successful, and you have this story from your life or this belief that you're not the type of person that deserves success or that money is evil, that's an incoherent life narrative. You're basically coming up against yourself. And so it's not metaphorical. Your brain integrates your reconstructed past, your imagined future into this internalized life story that gives your entire existence either unity and purpose or confusion.
Yeah.
The second is the marketing angle. And so I became really good at copywriting and marketing, but every good marketer knows that you don't sell people with facts and figures. You sell them through story. Yeah. Russell Brunson, one of the most famous marketers in the world, calls it the epiphany bridge. You walk people through your journey from your old belief system, through the moment that disrupted everything, to the new opportunity you discovered. So people buy transformation through story, not logic. Right. I learned through self-help that it was the story. I could sit there and be like, well, this happens for a reason, but if I don't actually get to my story to see how I fit in it, then it's just cliches that don't mean anything. Yeah. But then third is the ancient wisdom perspective. As I was learning about these ancient wisdom traditions, how religion had co-opted it, one of the things that really struck me was the Eleusinian mystery schools. They were these sacred initiation rites in ancient Greece that used story as a kind of consciousness technology. So it wasn't just entertainment or history. They were actually these narrative experiences designed to create specific psychological transformations. So initiates would experience something like death of Persephone and rebirth through symbolic storytelling, usually on a little bit of psychedelics. But they would leave transformed, and they would travel sometimes hundreds of miles on foot to come and have these experiences. And so these 3 angles were pointing to the same truth, that stories don't just describe reality, they actually create it. And so the thread connecting them all is that humans are narrative beings. We don't just tell stories, we become them. And so something about that all clicked together. I realized most people that are obsessed with Bible history aren't obsessed with marketing. And I was like, oh,
not at all.
Like I'm supposed to bring here. And so I wrote a book about it that should be out next year. But I also, I started realizing that is the healing that most people need. It's not just the mindset. It's like who you believe yourself to be at your core, and how do you fit into everything that's happened and everything that you want to happen. And that's where you can change your life the fastest.
Yeah, because you could like say an affirmation over and over again, which I'm like, whatever. But if you're not doing it or feeling it or actively making it happen, it's not happening. You know? So I think you're speaking to that. So what are some of the, like, I know you've probably done Joseph Campbell's, work or read his stuff, but this whole concept of, the hero's journey too, like you're battling dragons and all this stuff. I mean, isn't there something deeper going on in some of these stories where, you're up against all this stuff, right? We're all up against something.
Yep.
And then at the end, it seems like we're really up against ourselves, right? We're the one blocking the transformation from happening.
Well, in the end, it depends on your level and how you're going to see these stories. Every good story follows the same hero's journey. It's usually 6 steps, but I've added a 7th because I think it's one of the most important if you want to actually integrate it into your life. But it basically is the algorithm is what I call it. And mind you, I've sort of reframed some of these just to help people actually use it for the purpose that is to reshape your life. But I didn't invent this completely. I just clarified it so that people could use it. But the first step is the algorithm. It's the story that's running your life without knowing it. So you've been living inside of a loop. It's like a pattern shaped by past experiences, beliefs, conditioning. You didn't consciously choose the story. It was given to you in some way. And most people just think that's how life is. And so you can figure out what your algorithm was by asking yourself, like, what were you taught about? Success or love or worth or identity, all those big things. If you already know, like, hey, I'm actually doing this because I've now attracted the same relationship pattern over and over again. Why do I keep going through this? What do I want to see? Then look at it through that lens. What were you taught about relationships? What were you taught about love? What were you taught about a woman's place? What were you taught about the dynamics between men and women? And so you can use it broadly or you can target it. I still use this. It's not just a one and done thing for me. I'm like, okay, why does this keep showing up now? What recurring experiences have shaped your beliefs? This is where a lot of people live without questioning it the whole time. Your family members that never get into self-development, they're just in their algorithm till the day they die.
Melissa, they don't think there's a problem.
They
just
think everybody else is the problem.
Yeah. What do you mean? I'm not the problem. It's you.
Yeah. But these questions will really help you spot your subconscious patterns and the default beliefs based on past experiences. Then there's the disruption. This is the shock that breaks the loop. And so something shakes up the algorithm. It could be a crisis. It could be an unexpected truth. It could be somebody saying something that hits you in a new way. It doesn't always have to be this big unraveling, but whatever it is, the old story stops working. And I can look at this through different areas of my life of when that disruption happened, that world religions class with religion. Not even then, a different disruption was the way my church handled my sexual assault. They just thought I was sexually active. They dropped my solos in choir, like these moments where it feels like a shattering a little bit. Then there's the awakening. This is seeing the pattern for what it is. For some people, this overlays right on top of that disruption. The disruption happens and they're like, oh my gosh, here it all is. Sometimes it takes a few years.
Yeah.
Like one of my disruptions was the arrest. I didn't automatically know what was going on. I felt a fragment in that courtroom, but it took me years to really see what that awakening was, my place in it, to get out of the victim mindset. But this is the moment that you saw the pattern, the assumptions that you realize weren't actually true. The next phase is the resistance. This is the battle between old and new. This is usually the other phase that people live in the longest and can get stuck in, because you see the old story, but it doesn't let go so easily. No. It's where fear and resistance and identity crises show up. So what fears or doubts made it hard to step into the new version of you? Where did you hesitate or self-sabotage or nearly turn back? I just had a call with one of my clients that said, I just realized like I've been so immersed in spirituality and there's all these little pockets of my life that I'm not living it. I believe it, but where am I not integrating it and embodying it? Or how often do we know what we need to do, but we just still haven't joined the gym? Or then we join the gym and we just never go, whatever it is. Or we stay in the relationship that we know is making us miserable. This is the resistance.
Well, and you're speaking to something interesting there, because I think you're pointing at, it's really this like deep latent fear of the unknown. Like we're so, whether our life is miserable or not, we're so comfortable in it. You know, there's a comfort we grab a hold of. So that resistance is like, I am too afraid to see what's possible on the other side. Yeah.
Yep.
That's so real. Yeah, you're right.
And then finally, we live there long enough that many of us get to the choice point where it's like, okay, I'm done doing this. Maybe I'll do the activities in the back of those chapters.
I'll actually write it out.
I'm actually going to go to the gym today. And so it's not about just seeing the pattern. It's about choosing a new one. This is where you say, I'm not going back. Doesn't mean you never kind of get stuck in the resistance, but you start to make some bolder choices. What was the exact moment you decided to change for real? Oftentimes, this is when the fear of change becomes less than the fear of being stuck where you are forever. Then is the embodiment. This is becoming the new version of you, where change meets action. So you're not just thinking differently, you're actually living differently. What are all of the actions, habits, choices that solidified this transformation? If you're like me and end up feeling like you went through this because you're meant to bring something to the world, oftentimes this section becomes the curriculum that you teach people, along with all of the mindset changes you learned from the previous 5 steps. And so this is the hero's journey, though. But there's a 7th step that I think is so important if you want to really integrate it all together. And I call it the gold. A friend of mine calls it the soul, but it's extracting the deeper meaning in patterns, realizing that the story isn't about just what happened. It's about what it means. So looking back, what was your story really about? How does this experience help you help others? What's maybe the one sentence of wisdom that the journey gave you? What new patterns do you see in your life now? This reflection part is how you really embody your story, how you absorb the changes that you consciously made and you claim them. It's really the claiming part of it. And I think a lot of people miss that. You will shift a lot by just taking action and engaging in the world, but it's not until you actually sit there and you claim it and you're like, no, actually, I think I'm the teacher now. Or nope, I deserve somebody who reflects love back to me, not all of my unworthiness.
Yeah.
Oh, my relationships are reflections of my inner state. This is the claiming of it. And this is what helps you really take the entire hero's journey and make yourself the hero of it. And so almost every story can be looked at through that lens. And when you realize you're missing parts, that's usually when you're like, oh, that's why I can never fully see it. It's because I need to go back and really process this section.
Well, and then it's almost like, too, you're becoming the cause instead of the effect of your life. You know, you are not the victim anymore. And even if you find yourself in victim situations, which is possible, you're not seeing it that way anymore. You can always shift it. Yeah. Those are great tools. So that's in your book coming out. Is that right?
Yeah. But I can walk you through how even something like the story of Genesis fits into that.
Yes, let's do it.
So Eden represents unconscious unity when life feels figured out and you're cruising along. And so this is a little bit different because this is kind of the fall of our mind, the disconnection of unity. Whereas that algorithm probably would have been pretty much better to stay in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where we're going back to.
But this is the story of all of consciousness. Yeah. And the serpent brings that activation energy. It's questioning your assumptions. Are you sure those limits are real? Then the apple activates choice points and helps you develop discernment. It's the tree of knowledge, really, which, mind you, when I was young, I was always like, wait, so we're not allowed to learn? And the fact that we chose knowledge, we're now damned forever? That makes no sense. Yeah. But when you really see it, wait, hold on, this is duality. Now we know that we're naked. We're just experiencing shame around something that should have just, and so it's the disconnection of the mind. Yeah. The fall creates a vibrational drop into matter consciousness for experience. We see it as or religious people see it as the fall of mankind, but this is just the fall, the separation of consciousness. Hiding when they were naked represents your first spiritual bypass when you can't handle the new awareness. Oh my God, this is too much. Let me cover everything up. I don't want to look at it. Yeah. And then the consequences, like pain in childbirth, having to work for your food, are those consequences, or does it teach you the rules of duality? It's not necessarily punishment. It's the curriculum of this earth school that we've just chosen to drop into. Yeah. And then the exile represents the conscious partnership with the divine. It's like the graduation into co-creation. It's like, okay, well now I'm choosing this human experience, but now how am I going to do that? Am I going to take it one way and just let the ego lead? Or am I going to try to feel back into divinity and really bridge that gap? Yes. And so when you look at the story through a new lens, and it's interesting because there are multiple ways that I've heard this story reinterpreted, but I believe that they all have truth in them, because I think that is how consciousness technology works. It's kind of like if you and I were both given the same book, and even if we went chapter by chapter, what were your takeaways? Your takeaways would be different than my takeaways. Yep. And even if you read it for the second time, your takeaways that time would be different than the first time, because you have become a new person.
Yes.
During that. And so I think with the best stories, you can interpret them based on where you are, and you will interpret them in different ways, depending on where you are in your own journey, how your mind processes an idea so big as God. Do you call it universe? Do you call it God? Is it just the divine matrix? Is it a man in the sky? Are these all ways to deceive us, or are they all paths back to the same thing, because we all need very different things? Yeah. The way I process information is very different from my boomer mother. She feels very safe with the structure of religion. She has no questions, and she thinks it's evil to question it. Right. I am not that way. I tried to force myself to be that way, and I just felt inauthentic. Yeah. I think she'll take that path till the day she dies, and it'll give her peace. Yeah. Glad it exists for her. Right. But I don't want somebody telling me that is the only way, because that's just foolish.
It is. And you're pointing at that, getting to attach to how your return to that understanding or realization of God or God energy, whatever the terminology, I'm not even sure there's a term, is different for every person. And each thing in this world can serve as a symbol to get us there, and that I like your interpretation of the garden and Genesis, because I'm like you. I don't see that as a literal interpretation.
Biblical literalism is the worst thing to ever happen to the Bible.
It's like, what are we talking about, people?
It's why they took out the Gnostic Gospels, which, by the way, they were included in the Bible until the 1912 versions. And so for all the Christians that say, well, they took it out for a reason, you mean the Council of Nicaea, that first of all was already corrupt. And the first Christian empire was one of the most corrupt empires that we had. And then they chose what's in the Bible, and they even counted that, and then they decided to take it away right before all the Rockefeller crap happened. Yeah. Like, really, you're going to trust that? You don't have any questions? But it's also why the same stories show up in every culture, because even the ones with no contact at all, they tell the same stories everywhere. Like the flood narrative that most people or Christians know from Noah shows up where the Mesopotamians wrote about the surviving a boat thousands of years before Genesis. The Greeks told it. Native Americans across the continent have flood myths. Aboriginal Australians, who, by the way, isolated for 65,000 years, tell the same story. And it's just different names, but the same plot. Humanity gets wiped out, few survive, and then everyone starts over. And so
what is that narrative? Because it is throughout. Have you seen these where there's like the flood with the mud? All the mud is covering up I've seen this
mud
too.
Flood, that's
mud flood. Yeah. Really? But this theory of mud, the flooding everywhere. What's the deeper interpretation of this?
Well, I think consciousness leaves identical fingerprints everywhere. And that's actually one I'm still discerning myself, because the mud floods kind of put a twist on things. There's actually quite a bit of evidence that we might have just had a global reset. But
that's a whole nother show.
When I'm looking at it from the bigger picture of it, it's like this shared mental architecture that all humans draw from. And so certain symbols and story patterns show up everywhere because they emerge from, it's like the deep structure of human awareness itself. And our brains are literally wired for specific narrative patterns, which is why a 3-year-old can follow every Disney movie plot, because the plots follow those same universal patterns that are encoded in sacred texts. And so oftentimes it's the hero leaves home, faces monsters, and returns transformed. Yeah. But in terms of the flood, it's like, it's too much. Like there's too much chaos, and then you just wipe it all out and you rebuild. It's the same structure that happens within stories. Another one is the death and resurrection pattern that shows up in Egypt with Osiris, Greece, Persephone, Christianity, Jesus. Buddhism is just the enlightenment cycle, and it maps the fundamental process of consciousness evolution. And so I think they're all just telling us in different ways that you can't access higher awareness while clinging to a lower identity. Sometimes you need to wipe it all out. And every breakthrough requires some form of ego death and consciousness rebirth. And so I think the fact that isolated cultures independently developed narrative structures suggests that these aren't just things that we've learned. It's hardwired instructions into how awareness evolves, disguised as entertainment, because when it's disguised as entertainment, our defenses aren't up arguing against the facts and figures. We're just in that hypnotic state, like when we're children, just absorbing it all as truth.
Right. That's so interesting. What do you think about the concept of the virgin births all over too? You've got Jesus, you've got Krishna, right? I think Buddha even. I always look at that as like maybe a symbol of the purity that we really are beyond a body, right? As spirit. And this whole concept of virgin is nothing to do with actual physical virgins in the world, that we're all pure and whole. That's the virgin term. And if we're birthing a Christ, that means our realization that we are the Christ consciousness, not literally getting pregnant without having sex in the world.
Well, there's quite a few ways to interpret this. One, there are people that believe, and I like to lean towards both. Both can be true, because I don't need them to be true in a concrete sense as much as I need them to be true for me. So I can go back and forth between Jesus was actually came to disrupt the institutions, which the evidence that we see of his life shows a lot from that. He flipped the tables. He was speaking out against the rules and telling people to reconnect with their heart, like let go, like how do you get to heaven? Let go of material things and follow me type thing. He's like, that's the identity he's getting people to leave behind. But you can also realize that not one person wrote about Jesus until decades after he supposedly died. Not even a diary entry. Like, whoa, I saw this dude in the courtyard healing this blind man. Nothing. Nobody. I know. And so there's quite a bit of evidence that Jesus was a myth, that he was. But then what does that mean? Does that mean he didn't exist and everybody made him up? Or is he some sort of consciousness pattern? Was he a spiritual entity that came in and transformed in another way? Maybe that's what the virgin birth is. But I think it's a metaphor for a consciousness that creates without interference. So as you said, it's like this pure, unconditioned creation that comes directly from source instead of from ego or programming. The moment you say who his mommy and daddy are, and suddenly you can argue, hey, that guy can't be that cool. But it's something entirely new, born from something within you that's untouched by the past. And so I think that's why the virgin birth comes up with Horus, Dionysus, Jesus, even in Buddhism and Hinduism. It's across cultures.
Yeah. Well, it's really amazing that there is so much depth to these stories. And I love that you're sharing them in a way that really can be applied to anybody. It's like you said, it's in the eye of the beholder. What does it mean to you is really all that matters. Even if it was real or not, is it relevant? It's the message that's there,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Plenty of people go all into a religion that I find ridiculous, and they are transformed. Yeah. To me, I feel like I don't have that level of obedience or blind faith, first of all. And there's a lot of spiritual paths. And I would say that for me, Christianity seems the least transformational. A lot of the Western religions are very obedience oriented, like conform and obey.
Yeah.
Whereas that doesn't work for me, and I don't think it ever will. And so trying to fit myself in a box is just going to feel inauthentic. But yeah, so I seek the ones that help me to transform. But if I were to share some of the things that I'm learning, the way that I look at life, like I believe God to be a divine matrix and this universe to be set in motion by divine energetic laws, like the law of karma, the law of reflections. And so the way I process my hardships, it's like, okay, it's like Byron Katie, the turnarounds, where everything's a reflection for you. I'm only triggered by this thing in this other person because that also exists in me. You can't say that to somebody in their time of crisis. You can't say that to people, a lot of people, even in the first 5 years of their spiritual path.
No.
We build to this. So,
you're going to get slapped in the face. And it's just not.
I'm constantly surprised by what I share where I'm like, really, do I have enough to share on this? And I say one thing that seems so basic that if somebody came to me with a podcast pitch on this, I'd be like, absolutely not. Everybody knows this. And then I say it to somebody and they're like, oh my gosh, my life is forever changed. We're just all at different places, looking for the different pieces that are going to create the wholeness that we're seeking.
I think you're spot on right there. And I think that might be a great place to wrap up our fabulous chat here. Before we sign off though, Melissa, is there anything else that you'd like to leave the listeners with? Anything that maybe somebody's struggling in that, stuck story, what would you leave them with?
Yeah, I want to reiterate what I said earlier about how there is no middle ground. We're either consciously creating or unconsciously repeating. But here's the thing. We're never going to get to a place of, all right, complete peace all the time. We just change our relationship with our struggles. That's what the work is about. And honestly, with my personality type, I'm never going to get to a place of peace because I'm a seeker. If you seek, you will be disturbed. That is the rule of everything. Like I'm looking for the next thing. I'm digging into the wounds. Yeah. Like that's not always the best way to like make them go completely away, but I will find out the root of it. And so it can feel very overwhelming if you're just starting to be more conscious in your life, especially if you spent as many years as I did trying not to feel, because now you're flooded with these things. So go at your own pace, but also know that, yes, it feels overwhelming because you start to bring awareness and realize how many things might be different than how you would want them to be. But pick the one that keeps showing up for you, that feels most important, and only focus on that for now. You stall your growth when you bring in self-judgment. So if you cannot meet the moment with self-compassion, doesn't have to be right away, but notice when you're spiraling and then be like, hold on, this is a pattern that was just trying to protect me at one point. This is something that helped me survive. Thank you. But I'm going to try a new way now. That's how you can continuously move through your growth. And the good news is, when you work on one for a while, you build a new default. So it's not like all of a sudden you never have a moment to Netflix and chill. You're like, it's just like, oh, wow, now I actually feel like a different person looking back. I've been doing this for 2 years. It feels like I'm still in the weeds, but I just noticed I handled that argument differently than I would have 3 years ago. Wildly differently. Well, how amazing. Let me celebrate my growth. And then somebody else is going to pop up and be a mirror for something else. Yeah. On that one. And so that is what the process of this life is. It's just bringing awareness to your own shadows and bringing more of yourself into the light so that you feel lighter and freer as you build that conscious life for yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's a really great way to put it. And like you just said, you're always going to get a lot of practice in this world, everybody. Because
especially if you're the kind that's listening to this podcast, you are a seeker. You're probably here to forge that path before other people. And so you can get down on yourself for it or realize, wait, I chose this and I wouldn't really have it any other way. And if I'm looking for growth, I will find struggles along the way. So that's just how it's going to work. Or you can put your head in the sand and you can be like Aunt Brenda and just like watch the Kardashians and go to bed and like
eat your popcorn and just
watch. Be happy. But you might not bring your struggles to the surface quite as much. You'll just sit next to them on the couch.
Right. Well, and welcome the struggle, because there is a nugget in there for all of us. So Mellissa, it's been so awesome to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining me. And I would love to have you back anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a really awesome conversation. I love deep conversations. By the way, this was one of my way of building that in. I'm like, nobody wants to talk about this stuff. Let me just build a career around connecting with people who do.
I feel the same way. We're kindred spirits that way. So thanks so much for sharing.
Can I share to find my podcast?
Yes, 100%. We love you on Mind Love.
My show is called Mind Love. You can find it on any of your favorite podcast players or go to mindlove.com. And I do have a free weekday email list that's just helps you start your day with a positive thought, to reframe something that might make your day go smoother. It's like your little accountability buddy for, hey, think this way and carry it throughout the day. So you can find that at mindlove.com.
Oh, that's awesome. And I will make sure to link everything, all of your information in the show notes. And I know you've got lots of programs for people too. So everybody check Mellissa out at mindlove.com. All right. We'll talk soon, Mellissa. Bye-bye.
Bye.